So we're left off with local peculiarities. I remember this. Of turbulence, habitat, sediment composition, and so on, would be expected to cause local variations in organic assemblages, with even occasional heterogeneous agglomerations of sediments and organisms of a wide variety of shapes and sizes. Obviously not dependent upon when the organism lived, but on its physical characteristics. So it says, but on the average, and here's the thing, the sorting of action is quite efficient and would definitely have separated the shells and other fossils in just such fashion as they are found, with certain fossils predominant in certain horizons, but not according to when they were born or when they existed. The complexity of such index fossils increasing with increasing evolution in the column, in at least a general way. Why? Because the more complex you are, the less spherical and dense you are. The simpler the organism, the smaller the organism, the more spherical it'll be at the bottom. Doesn't mean that it was existed earlier. It's the physical characteristics of it. And then, of course, the evolutionists play havoc with that. They draw their own conclusions. So M.E. Clark and H.D. Voss of the Genesis Research Laboratory wrote this paper. From the paper Fluid Mechanic Examination of the Tidal Mechanism for Producing Mega-Sedimentary Layering, a paper submitted for this third International Conference on Creationism. Okay, well, these guys are on the side of creationism. Okay, I just read that, yeah. The shallow water tidal waves are perfect candidates for the role of sediment transport and deposition associated with the buildup of the layered sedimentary column. So it is layered, it is sedimentary, because it's deposited by sediments. The global ocean in the tidal context is shown to be near resonance, which would augment the load-carrying ability of the tidal waves. So what can the water carry? And it carries it in a particular level of the water, depending upon all those physical characteristics, sphericity, density, and so on. The geometrics of the Earth's sedimentary structures are characterized primarily by their tendency to lie in the horizontal position, while many of the structures are now tilted and folded because of drastic, catastrophic changes, one way or the other. One wave comes smashing into another, and another one comes behind it, bringing more sediment, and so on. Depends upon how often those waves come back and forth and hit each other, and another one comes later on, much later on, months later. Sounds like 100,000, 100 million years. No, just that's it. You know, the worldwide flood may be 6 months, plus thereafter settling. This dominant feature is definitely attributable to the manner in which they are formed. They were formed. Since water was the medium that carried most of the sediments into their present locations, sometimes volcanism, and since the main geometric characteristics of free water surface is its tendency to gravitate to the horizontal position, it follows, because of gravity, it follows that sedimentary structures should be dominated by horizontal tendencies. A secondary characteristic of the sedimentary structures of great importance is their conformal layering. Although many have sought to use this characteristic to give the structure excessive age, a careful consideration of the layers and their contents will show that each layer must have been laid down within hours of the preceding layer. As I said, one wave comes after another. It's not that wave selected, well, I'm going to only get the oldest fossils. No, it's all haphazard, worldwide flood. Some things are deposited many, many, many miles away because of worldwide flood. You got 300-400 mile an hour waves slamming into each other, depositing stuff, and then something comes seconds later, not 100 million years later. So within hours of the preceding layer, resulting in their witness to a very short period of time from the construction of the whole series of layers. Fluid bodies can be moved by one or a combination of these three mechanisms: pressure, gradients, gravitational attraction, and boundary movements. Gravitational attraction, the speed of waves. Of these three, gravitational attraction presents itself as the primary mover of a global ocean. Hello? Sir Isaac Newton's universal law of gravitational attraction. Every body is attracted to every other body with a force that is directly proportional to their product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them, requires that the water in that global ocean respond to the bodies neighboring the ocean. The closest and most dominant neighbor to the global ocean of water would have been planet Earth beneath the ocean. This attraction is what would have caused the primary horizontal geometry of the water surface. The second closest and second most dominant neighbor would have been the moon, right? The sun, although larger but further away, has less than half the lunar influence. The gravitational attraction of the Earth-Moon-Sun system on today's ocean causes what are called the tides. The bulk of the sedimentary structures forming the so-called geologic column can be attributed to the wave action of the tides in the global flood of Genesis. Now remember, we got a violent occurrence of rain coming down hard, and we have volcanic action and earthquakes, which would just stir up all kinds of stuff. You've heard of tsunamis, right? The regular waves are nothing compared to the power and speed of tsunami waves. The tidal waves that occur in the oceans of the Earth today range from 1 or 2 meters to more than 15 meters, depending on many factors. It should be noted that today's oceans differ greatly from the global ocean associated with the Genesis flood. Besides its different depth, on average about 2,400 meters compared to the 3,600 meter average depth of today's oceans. That ocean had no boundaries to interrupt the action of the tidal waves because today's tidal waves operate in restricted basins of various sizes, some very large. But the tidal action is discontinuous, being stifled by the continental boundaries which form the basins. You have a worldwide flood, you got nothing restricting it. It just goes wham until the next wave comes from the other side. The continuity of the wave action of the global flood would have been especially beneficial in increasing the load-carrying capacity of the tidal waves by augmenting their amplitude. Large wave amplitude is desirable because the ability of the wave to envelop, transport, and deposit large sediment loads is enhanced by the associated larger velocity fields. Imagine a wave coming by as fast as an airliner, smashing into another one coming from the other side. So large wave amplitude is desirable relative to what we see because the ability of the wave to envelop, transport, and deposit large sediment loads is enhanced by the associated larger velocity fields. A second, perhaps crucial feature connected with the continuity of the wave action is the possibility that it would have been instrumental in developing resonance in the tidal action. Any cyclic system can develop the large amplitudes associated with resonance if certain criteria are met. One wave going along in the same direction as the other, man, you've got one big wave. In the global ocean context, equality of the free and forced wave speeds is necessary. The free wave speed, associated with the speed with which a disturbance would propagate in the ocean, is dependent on the ocean depth. The forced wave speed, associated with the relative speed of the tidal bulge, is dependent upon the rate of rotation of the Earth. That's going to create some havoc. The sedimentary structures of the geologic column offer excellent evidences for the limitedness of time. The conformal layering without erosion marks between layers, the entombed and preserved fossil skeletons and tracks, the extensive graveyards of intact plants and animals, as well as extensive graveyards of dissolved plants and animals in the huge gas and oil deposits, the polystrate fossil plants and trees spanning many sedimentary layers, and the presence of meteorites only in the top layers of the column. All these push to the fore the demand for a short period of time for the development of the column. So, since the horizontal features of the sedimentary structures require, in most cases, water as the means of deposition, and since the sediments are present over all the globe, even on the tops of the major mountains, the thought vector points to the global ocean as the vehicle for their placement. This vector is consistent with the Bible and with the other historical records of a global ocean. Prior to the Darwinian revolution, the historical view of geology was based on catastrophism in conjunction with a universal deluge. Notice that. Evolution didn't really get its hand into the thing until long after we have a history of universal deluge, worldwide flood, and then Darwin comes along, and everybody goes along with that. even though none of it made any sense. The originators of these concepts were, for the most part, believers in the biblical record, who were also aware of the field evidence and who made the connection between the two types of evidence. It is noteworthy that after a century of uniformitarian failures to explain the field evidence, catastrophism is coming back into vogue in geologic explanations. Of course, they twist it in their own direction, say this is unusual, or this is explained here, but that's against the general rule. These three fluid mechanisms are currently being used to explain the development of sedimentary structures, tidal waves, turbidity currents, and tsunamis. So, to repeat, three fluid mechanisms are currently being used to explain the development of sedimentary structures, tidal waves, turbidity currents, and tsunamis. Well, we're learning a lot of stuff, aren't we? The tsunami is a wave action generated by a subaquatic subterranean earth movement that causes a large-scale disturbance in the ocean water. Although a tsunami's effects may be felt halfway around the earth, it has nothing to do with actual tidal mechanisms. The tsunami is a unique, non-cyclic event attributable to a single, unique, non-cyclical cause. How about a local earthquake? How about earthquakes all over the world at the same time? Local worldwide flood. A turbidity current is also a unique, non-cyclic event attributable to a single, unique, non-cyclic cause. A gravity-driven mass of sediment plunges down an incline, which entrains more sediment as it moves downward. At the bottom of the incline, the moving mass fans out as its momentum carries it over a possibly large area depositional plain. I mean, huge, miles, hundreds of miles. Tsunamis, at that scale anyway. Tsunamis and turbidity currents are important in the explanation. All right, well, let me fix this. Early burial, the next category of marine creatures, fits into all of this. In fact, just draw lines quickly here. All right, we got it all underlined. Early burial of marine creatures. Why is that significant? Well, of course, in localities where more than one system is found exposed or revealed by well logging or other means. Let me just make this bigger. Well logging or other means. It is frequently found that the lowermost strata are those containing the simpler and therefore supposedly more ancient organisms, usually marine organisms. However, let's see, this, however, does not at all evidence evolution, as commonly claimed, but rather testifies quite plainly that these marine creatures were, as would be expected, deposited first and deepest in the deluge sediments. Why? Remember we talked about sphericity and density. And the less spherical, the more amorphous, like the mammals. And, of course, the mammals were not as dense either. And the smaller ones, they would be higher up on the scale of the sediment location. Why? Not because of their age, one came later than the other, but because of their density, lack of density, the lack of sphericity, and other factors. For example, they would float around a little bit, and a lot of them would disappear because they would disintegrate. The material of a shell would stay there and stay remaining. Maybe the internal parts of the shell would disappear, but the shell itself. But the human body isn't encased in a shell. And they were smart. They were able to get out of the way. Does that mean they're older? No. They're just smarter. So, this, however, does not at all evidence evolution as commonly claimed, but rather testifies quite plainly that these marine creatures were, as would be expected, deposited first and deepest in the deluge sediments. Two factors combine this to make this a general, though by no means inviolable act or rule. The sea bottoms, both deep and shallow seas, would have been at first affected by the breaking up of the foundations of the great deep. This inference is corroborated by the fact that those strata found usually lowest in the column are marine strata, containing marine organisms, with reference to the Cambrian strata, supposedly the oldest fossiliferous strata. At least 1,500 species of invertebrates are known in the Cambrian, all marine, of which 60% are trilobites and 30% brachiopods. Maurice Gignoux, Stratigraphic Geology, translated from the French. Okay, So they had their act there.